What's the creepiest creature from your country's folklore? Story 1. Here in Norway, we have a lot of legendary creatures, but Draugen is probably one of the creepiest. Though descriptions of it tend to differ from place to place and story to story, the general concept of it is pretty much the same everywhere. Draugen is essentially the ghost of a person who has died at sea. He can be seen on stormy nights, sailing in the splintered half of a boat with shredded sails. His face is fish-like, with soulless black eyes and a wide gaping mouth, and he has kelp and seaweed for hair. Sailors and fishermen foolish enough to head out to sea at night may hear only its shriek before they are pulled beneath the waves, only to return as Draugen themselves, doomed to haunt the waters forever. Other Norwegian folklore monsters, Huldra, apparently a beautiful woman but with a tail, lures you into the dark forest where you die and is eaten by her in some accounts. Nokken differs from the Swedish version mentioned elsewhere in the thread. In Norway, he is a beautiful young boy who sits on stones in rivers playing the fiddle or flute, luring you to drown, as it is most often in streams with strong currents he sits. Story 2. Here in Sweden, I think the two spookiest ones are Näcken, a naked old man who lives in rivers and ponds and plays a violin that places you into a trance. He then lures you into whatever source of whatever he lives in and drowns you. The second one is the Skogsrå, who'd be a lot creepier if it wasn't for the fact that she doesn't really do all that much. She looks like a beautiful woman from the front, but her back looks like a rotten tree trunk with a hole in it. She lurks near the edges of deep forests and tries to seduce men. If you treat her well, you'll be bestowed with luck, but if you treat her badly, you will be tormented by disease, and death. Story 3. Black Annis. In a grim, remote Leicestershire cave hewn with her own scraping steel-clawed hands, the old crone, Black Annis, was said to hang the trophy skins of flayed children, a terrifying, lonely creature that lived in the branches of a gnarled great oak, the lone remnant of a long-dead great forest. Black Annis was thought to have been the husk of a forgotten dark pagan goddess. Story 4. The will-o'-the-wisp is a strange light that lures hikers off of trails until they are lost. It's not as terrifying, but pretty creepy. The folklore is possibly related to a real phenomenon in which people hallucinate when in the wild for long enough and can wander randomly off the trail. This is also linked to people seeing strange lights, particularly in swamps, in which there are bioluminescent insects and flora, as well as swamp gas. This myth has variations from several continents. Story 5. A lot of modern interpretations of fairies are based on old Irish folklore, and so I have to go with them. Fairies aren't whimsical little sprites. They are vindictive fucks whose attitude and disposition towards you could change on a whim. Piss off a fairy and chances are you are going to have a miserable life. Though this works both ways. Have one in debt to you and you are in mad luck. Probably. Really fascinating folklore behind these creatures. I advise reading up on them. Story 6. In northern Canada, there's a creature called the Wendigo. It used to be a person that once upon a time tainted her soul and ate human flesh. The Wendigo became so consumed with flesh after that it became insatiable. All attempts it makes at feeding itself grows the Wendigo and doesn't satiate it. They are said to have eaten their own lips because they just couldn't resist. As the legends go, you should be careful while walking the forests, as the Wendigo might capture you and eat you. But it won't just eat you in one go, it's used to hunger. It'll keep you alive as long as possible, so that it has a food source for as long as it can during the winter. Story 7. We have a creature called a kuri. It is known to wait near graves of people who have died on the moor. If you walk past one of these graves, it will latch onto you. It slowly convinces you of its existence over the course of weeks, if not months. First, you may hear a faint whisper in your ear. You may dream of it or feel a cool touch on the back of your neck. Over time, its presence will start to become more known. It will grab your leg in the night, start attacking you in your dreams, and transpose its face onto your family members as you're talking to them. It will never make itself known to anyone else, making you question your own sanity. It will start talking to you, asking you to go back to the moorland, promising you your freedom back if you do. Eventually, once the mental torment gets too much, you give in and wander back out to the moors. It will keep telling you you're almost there, allowing you to wander aimlessly around. Eventually, exhaustion will strike you and you will be forced to watch your body succumb to the elements. As you lie there, unable to lift a finger, the Kuri tells you how much it will enjoy dragging your soul to hell. And like that, another grave is created. Story 8. I'm from Scotland and we have quite a few. There are ones that I find not so much creepy, but definitely odd, haha, such as the Wolver. Wolver was described as a man covered with brown hair on his body and the head of a wolf. Though he was not malicious, apparently he was fond of fishing and would do so for hours, even leaving fish on the windowsills of poor families. And there is the Selkie, similar to a mermaid, I suppose. These creatures had the skin of a seal, but could shed them when they came to land. They often came to land to have children with the men there, only going back to find their skin and return to the ocean. Story 9. In South Africa, it is common for native Africans to sleep with their bed on top of bricks or another device to raise the bed. They believe in a creature called the Tokolosh, which sits on your chest while you sleep and steals your breath, causing you to gasp for air or even die. This is how it was described to me by my parents, who saw multiple African beds which were abnormally high off the ground. Story 10. Children and women would dance around a village fire, and during this process, everyone would write their names on rocks and place them in and around said fire. When the fire started to die out, they would all run home, whereas if they stayed, your Huch du Guta, a bad omen that took the form of a tailless black sow with a headless woman, would devour their souls. Afterward, men would go from door to door holding a mare's skull dressed as a ghost, decorated with jewelry and expensive garments. This being is called Marie Louide, and she is created to ward off evil. The reason these men would visit each house was to cleanse the residents' homes so that they would be safe during the winter time when food was scarce. By not tipping the guests, bad spirits would remain in the residents' homes, so the men sang, read poetry, and even danced, and the residents would then tip them with anything they had on hand: money, bread, beer, etc. They would continue to do the same to the next house. With each house, they would become more and more jolly due to the fact that they would become progressively more intoxicated in the process. The following morning, a village elder would visit the dead fireplace around which the children and women had danced on the previous night. All the stones containing villagers' names would be checked. If, however, a stone was missing, the person who wrote their name on the stone would die within 1 year. Story 11. Hawaii, USA, Night Marchers. They're the spirits of ancient Hawaiian warriors. You can tell they're coming when you hear drums and see torches. To avoid them from killing you, you're supposed to avoid eye contact, take off your clothes, and pretend to be dead, or just get out of these as fast as possible. I've also heard that if you have an ancestor marching in the party, you're safe. I always heard stories about them growing up and was terrified of running into them because I have no Hawaiian blood and I'd freak the hell out if I heard their drums. Story 12. Mothman. He's a creepy guy with glowing red eyes and hidden moth wings who walks along roads and neighborhoods at night. I remember a story of a mother playing with her family in their living room when she looked at the door window and saw him staring at them. When I was a kid, I would always shut the blinds on all of the windows in our house, but there was one window in the kitchen without blinds, so most nights I would either go to bed hungry or sprint to get food, because if I did pass that window and there was a man's face pressed against the glass, then I would become a shrieking puddle of piss, and that would wake my parents up. Story 13. Naikur, Icelandic nightmare horse. A horse that hangs around lakes. If you touch it, you are glued to it. If anyone tries to help you by grabbing you and dragging you away, they are stuck to you. The Naikur then walks into the lake and drowns you. Why? Because Naikur exists to take you apart. Story 14. Love this thread. Folklore is so interesting. Trinidadian. Folklore, the Sukuyon. I used to be scared she would come and get me at night. She's described as an old woman who can shed her skin and become a ball of fire or an animal you wouldn't suspect. She sucks your blood and can turn you into things. To spot a succulent, you have to dump 100 pounds of rice at a crossroad, and she will be compelled to pick them up grain by grain. If you know who the succulent is, you have to find her shredded skin and put salt in it before dawn. Her skin would shrivel up and she won't be able to get back inside. Dozens of these creatures haunted my nightmares. They are children's spirits that died before baptism. They have no faces and their feet are back to front, heels facing forward. It still crawls my blood to imagine them with their backward feet. They can steal children's names and lure them away from their families. It's funny to think of what scared me as a kid. I hated the Easter bunny. I imagined a six-fifth monster bunny, so I always slept in my parents' bed the night before Easter. Story 15. In Mexico, maybe it could be El Nagual. A Nagua is a human being who has the power to transform either spiritually or physically into an animal form, most commonly a jaguar and puma, but also other animals such as a donkey, birds, dogs, and coyotes. In English, the word is often translated as transforming witch, but translations without the negative connotations of the word witch would be transforming trickster or shapeshifter. It is said that some naguales still exist and snatch children to eat them. Story 16, time to throw in some Chinese. Although I'm not from China, but Chinese, so this is stretching the question slightly. Anyway, the Chinese zombie, or jiangshi, is a mummified corpse that has risen from the dead for various reasons. They don't eat brains or flesh. They drain you of your life force. They cannot walk or bend their limbs due to rigor mortis, and as such hop after their prey. That may sound silly at first, but imagine it. Actually imagine walking on a dark road at midnight by a graveyard, and as the cold night air brushes against your ear, you hear something like footsteps, only heavier, pounding through the grass, stirring the cool air behind you. Thump, thump, thump. You don't want to look back. You don't want to look back. Thump, thump, thump. I had nightmares about it when I first learned of it hopping in the dark, its outstretched arms, wrinkled gray skin, legs locked together, dead face in a slack, frozen leer. Thump, thump, thump. My Cantonese co-worker told me that you're not supposed to be afraid of them, you're supposed to pity them. She was saying that they are people who died far away from their homes, and all they are trying to do is hop back to their home village town. They want to be buried in their hometown because that's the only place they can find peace in death. Very much in tune with the whole fallen leaf returns to the roots idea. I don't know if that's her local variation or what. I'm from northern China and hadn't heard much about jiangshis until after I moved to the US. Story 17, Redcap, England, from Wiki. A redcap, also known as a dunter, is a type of malevolent murderous dwarf, goblin, elf, or fairy found in border folklore. They are said to inhabit ruined castles found along the border between England and Scotland. Redcaps are said to murder travelers who stray into their homes and dye their hats with their victims' blood, from which they get their name. Redcaps must kill regularly, for if the blood staining their hats dries out, they die. Redcaps are very fast in spite of the heavy iron pikes they wield and the iron-shod boots they wear. Outrunning a redcap is supposedly impossible. Story 18. In America, I know of two. Both are from states bordering my own, Pennsylvania. The first is the Jersey Devil. Its origin changes depending on who you ask, but the most popular version is a woman had 12 children and was pregnant with number 13. Either through superstition, 13 is considered an unlucky number, or through a witch's curse, she was convinced that 10 children would be evil. In one version, she leaves her normal, healthy boy out in the forest to die. The rage of being abandoned consumes the child, who morphs into a horrifying creature. In the other version, from birth, he is a horrible monster. The Jersey Devil is the size of, and has the body and head of, a horse, but he has a dog's nose, giant bat's wings, and sharp teeth. He can teleport, and he will destroy livestock and farms, and I think he attacks people too. Apparently, Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, who lived in Jersey for a time, saw the Jersey Devil at least once. He lives in the Jersey woods near farms. It has a horrifying cry. The other is the Mothman of West Virginia. The Mothman is a tall, bipedal, winged creature that appeared for a year here in West Virginia in the late 1960s. He seemed to be tall, covered in black fur, with gigantic moth wings and glowing red eyes. His presence was attributed to disaster, but whether he was a warning or the cause of disaster is unknown. The last reported mass sighting was when he flew over and perched on a bridge, which collapsed and killed 13 people. It is unknown whether he died or went into hiding after this, but he disappeared. He lives on in the memories of the residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and he has a statue dedicated to him. Story 19, not just in Slovakia, but that's where I learned of it. But I'd go with Poludnica. She is supposed to be the personification of sunstroke, a midday demon. It is said she appeared to farmers working in the fields around noon and engaged them in conversation, asking a difficult riddle. If they didn't know the answer, she would lop off their head with a scythe. Where I grew up, there is a mountain named after her, and the way I was told the story by my grandfather, it doesn't look like much from a distance, but is in fact the tallest mountain in the surrounding range. In the same way, Poludnica, the demon, appears as a small, frail woman in the distance at first, but by the time she gets close, it is already too late. Story 20, the Tokoloshe. In Zulu mythology is a dwarf-like water sprite. It is considered a mischievous and evil spirit that can become invisible by drinking water. Tokoloshes are called upon by malevolent people to cause trouble for others. At its least harmful, a Tokoloshi can be used to scare children, but its power extends to causing illness or even the death of the victim. The creature might be banished by a Nanga witch doctor who has the power to expel it from the area. I heard it slightly differently than Wiki as a kid because of the Shona influence in Zimbabwe. Story 21. There are a few strange creatures in the Jewish folklore. Rehem, a giant mammal the size of a mountain. There are said to be only 2 reams living simultaneously, 1 female and 1 male living on opposite sides of the planet. At the age of 70, they meet and reproduce, and then the female bites the male fatally. The female reem is pregnant for 11 years, and during the last year of the pregnancy, she is unable to walk. The drool from her mouth waters the fields around her to provide her food. After she gives birth to a male-female twin couple, she dies. The male walks east and the female walks west, only to meet again in 70 years. Golem, a man-shaped form that has been given life by a person with knowledge of Kabbalah. He was created to help the Jews in their times of distress. He was given life by writing God's name on a paper, placing it in his mouth, and writing the word truth, truth, on its forehead. When it was no longer needed, the letter A was removed, spelling the word dead, field sleepers, men with their umbilical cord connected to the earth. It was said that if they were detached, they would die. Arad, a snake-like creature. If bitten, the Arad and the bitten person race to the nearest water source. The first to reach the water would survive, and the second would die. These creatures aren't commonly believed, and most Jewish people aren't aware of their existence in the scripture. Story 22, we have a lot of lore around here, but my favorite is the Loup Garou. It's basically a werewolf, but with one big difference. When the Loup Garou is inflicted with a wound that will kill it, and the first drop of blood from the wound that will kill the beast is spilled, it turns into its human form, revealing itself to its attacker. Usually Loup Garous are in small towns, so the attacker knows the human form of the beast. Then it informs the attacker that it too will now become a Loup Garou for between 101 and 365, depending on which lore you read, days. After that time they will return to sole human form, but only if they do not tell anyone or let anyone find out. Also, they keep their human sensibilities, so they're a wolf monster with human intelligence, making them super hard to kill. They prey on women mostly, along with animals and children who wander alone. We also have lots of voodoo legends and other neat stuff, but this one is the most well-known. Story 23, I'm not from there, but in Japan there is a 2-mouthed woman called Futakuchi Onna, whose second mouth is on the back of her head. The story goes that a stingy man who hated paying for anything extra. He met a woman who didn't eat, so he took her for his wife. He was thrilled that he never had to pay for any extra food, but soon noticed his rice stores were rapidly decreasing. One day he stayed home to try and catch the culprit and saw his wife part her hair at the back to reveal a huge mouth on the back of her head, and her hair reached out and shoveled rice into that mouth. There are plenty of horror films and stories that feature her now. Story 24, I honestly don't know where it comes from, but my granddad used to tell me the story about a fear glass, Gaelic for the green man, used to scare the shit out of me. This is how he used to tell it more or less. In a time before saints or religion had come to Ireland, people would bury their dead with an offering. Usually the offering had to match the person's lifestyle. If the dead had been a poor farmer, a small offering of a loaf of brown bread or a sod of turf would do. A rich man like a landlord or banker would have to leave a money offering. In such circumstances, you'd go to a green man. On a side, from what I know, it wasn't actually a man. It was a fairy-like creature said to be about the size of a small child. When a person died, the green man would lie down on the grass beside their grave and await the offering. It was said that the green man would actively prevent the soul from moving on, and would actually torture the dead as they lay, making them believe they were alive and buried below ground, with no one coming to help them. It only let the dead go once the offering was made. Don't know if this is true, but my granddad used to say that the sound of the banshee was actually not the banshee, it was the screams of the dead being tortured by the green man. The belief that one is dead is said to be the relief that the offerings bring. When the dead come to terms with their demise, they move on. The green man was the gravekeeper, a small child lying eyes open next to the graves. Story 25, I'm from New Orleans. We have a lot of scary folklore, but one of my favorites is the Rougarou. It supposedly can take on many different forms, and is said to be a cursed human who can only break the curse by shedding human blood. It lives in the bayou. Growing up, if we were bad, the grown-ups would tell us that if we didn't behave, the Rougarou was going to get us. Story 26. Gotta say, when you go into the proper deep bush in Australia, you start remembering the old stories of the Quinkins, the spirits that'd hide in the crevices and dark places of the mountains and come out at night. There are the benevolent Tamara Quinkins, who are very tall and thin like a gum tree. Then there are the Imjims. These quickies are what spook you with every crash and creak in the night while you're camped out bush. They're short, stumpy, misshapen creatures with mouths of needle teeth and beady red eyes that glow in the darkness. They have a club-like tail which they use to bounce enormous distances. The Imjims love to feast on humans, seeking them out intentionally and attacking en masse. They also steal children. Unlike other spooky critters, Quinkins move in mobs. These mobs range from a few Quinkins to tens of Quinkins. The Imjim and Tamara Quinkins, due to their different attitudes towards humans, often come into conflict, even sometimes indirect but unobserved protection of the humans. Dogs can detect the presence of Quinkins and warn away some of the bad spirits. There are also the bunyips in the billabongs, water holes, for some more mainstream monsters. They just sorta drown you and eat you. Good on ya, bunyips.